Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for today's show. This week, Wesley Goodall joins me on the show. Wesley is a technician from the state of Washington. He works at a Sprinter garage that's also does some European vehicle work, but he focuses mainly on the Sprinter application. Wesley reached out to me through Facebook. He's a listener of the podcast, and we sat down to talk about coming up through the industry, some of the things you learn along the way, the path that you take in your career and the choices that you make, and why move from one position to another. What drives you? What's forming your choices when you decide to stay at a particular job or even in a line of career or move to the next? What are we trying to seek out? It was a good talk. I enjoyed getting to speak with Wesley. I like getting to talk with anybody who listens to the podcast. So, hey, if that's you, you're passionate about this industry and you want to sit down and talk about it, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to have you on. But with that out of the way, let's jump right in. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess we could start off with that. You could introduce yourself and give me the story of, what you do in this field, how you got there. And then I may interject along the way to ask questions or
feel free to steer it in whichever direction you feel necessary. But I'm Wesley, and I currently work at a shop that specializes in Sprinter vans, but I've been kind of doing the European car thing for the last couple of years, like I want to say 5-6 years. But I mean, how I got started in it, I guess, was when I was really young. I just kind of always liked taking things apart and figuring out how things worked. Mm-hmm. So that's, I don't know, when I was like a teenager and stuff, that's kind of, I was like, okay, this might be the career choice for me, mm-hmm. just because I really enjoyed it. And I was always like trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? What does this do? That sort of thing. So when it came time to get an education and kind of move into that sort of thing, I was kind of set and like, I want to go to tech school and this is what I want to do. Like when I found out that was the thing, because I was always wrenching on my own cars and kind of trying to figure out that sort of thing unsuccessfully a handful of times. But, I guess that's where I kind of figured out that's what I wanted to learn how to do it right. Because I always drove around like old piles of crap. I wanted, my parents got tired of paying for them to be fixed and stuff like that. So I'm like, I'll figure it out on my own, or, sure. I'll do it. And like, God, I think, what was it? My first car, I had this, like, it was like a little Mazda pickup. I think it was like a B2200 or something, like 90s Mazda pickup truck. And nice. Like the water pump went out, blew the head gasket. I was like, I think I was like 16 at the time. My parents like, well, I guess you're walking, better scrap it. And I'm like, no, I'm going to fix it. I was like dead set, like determined I was going to fix it. Like took the whole thing apart. And like, I was telling them, they're like, they had no faith in me that I was going to figure out how to fix it. But, like me, of course, I had like a toolbox full of like my grandpa's old tools and stuff like that. And, probably missing a lot of things, but I'm like, I'm going to figure out how to take this thing apart and, bought all the parts from the auto parts store, like the local O'Reilly's. And I was like, I'm going to do this whole thing. And, I like, now that I think back on it, I'm like, I don't even know if I torqued head bolts correctly or like did anything. Like, long story short, I got the whole thing back together. It never ran again.
Okay. That's going to be my question is, did it run when it went back together?
Yeah, no. And it didn't, but that's when I was like, I don't know, I guess the light clicked on. Cause I was like, it's like that combination of like, I was proud of myself for being like determined, but I was also disappointed in myself that I wasn't successful. So I was like, okay, there's got to be a way to figure out how to do this whole thing right. And that's where I kind of like, I never really let that whole thing go. So that's when like, when the opportunity of, going to tech school and making a career out of this whole thing came up, I was like, yeah, absolutely, that's where I want to go.
Yeah. So some of those early projects, I mean, successful or not, it's such a cool feeling, cool experience to go through that for the first time. You've never taken anything big like that apart before. I remember a couple of the early ones that I tackled on my own, besides just like changing oil or tire or brakes or something like that, was I had a 95 F-150 that I decided I wanted headers on, and I was going to do it myself, and pulling the exhaust manifolds and putting the other ones on in my parents' garage. Obviously living with them, and my dad, he knew I was into this stuff. He knew that I wanted to do it, but he's like, are you sure you can take this on? You sure that, you're going to be able to make this work? And I don't know, somehow or another, after days and days, I managed to, I managed to get that running. And then I put I changed out the supercharger on my old Buick Park Avenue, because I had the Ultra with the supercharger on it, and the bearing went out in it. And I mean, nowadays, I guess looking back, it really wasn't, that crazy of a job. But for me as a young kid and tackling that, and it didn't run at first because I messed up the throttle gasket. And so it poured coolant into the engine and it wouldn't start.
Yeah, just sucking water. And it's like, you're sitting there trying to troubleshoot it, like having no idea what you just created.
Yeah. And then it eventually got that fixed, got it started, and it like smoked out the neighborhood with white smoke because there was so much coolant in the engine. But I was pumped. I was so excited that I had it running. It was a pretty cool feeling when you're that new at it.
Yeah, and like, looking back on it now, it's like I think about all these things that I thought that like this was like this crazy wild project, and like, now I look back and I'm like, oh, that's easy, that's nothing. Because like I think after that, like my next project, before I actually got an education and did everything, like went through school and all that stuff, is like I had like an 80s Toyota pickup, and I did a clutch in it, and I did it like in my parents' driveway with floor jacks and like hand tools and all that sort of thing. And like it worked, and it like everything worked great. It went great. Like it took me a long time, like way longer than it should ever take anybody to do a clutch who knows what they're doing. But it worked, and I just like remember that feeling of being like, I did this and it's working, and like I can't, like, just that like ultimate satisfaction of like I completed this. And like I guess that's what kind of got me hooked on it, is like when you fix the car and you feel like it's a success and you did this right and you figured it out on your own. It's like a super rewarding thing.
Oh, 100%.
Like, you get that like euphoria about it.
It's something I don't know that you get in every career or every line of work. The feeling of accomplishment once you complete some huge task. I mean, whether it's a diagnostic where you finally figure out the problem, but just the mechanical side of things, right? Just disassembling, a whole engine or a whole transmission, or, doing an engine swap, or just a huge project, and then to hear the thing fire up or to drive it down the road for the first time. It's just, I haven't worked a whole lot of other lines of, career paths, but man, I can't imagine a whole lot of other careers where you get to do that on a daily basis. Once you're in this field and you're fixing a lot of cars, you get that accomplishment quite often.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that's always different too, because like, I mean, I even still think about it today. Like, you get those problems that just like, or those cars that just really beat you down, and you're like, you go home scratching your head, like thinking, where did I go wrong? What else could I have looked at? Or like, if I had only gone this way, or like, those cars that you don't figure out right away, that aren't the easy like 5-minute diagnosis. And it's like, and then when you finally get it, and it's like days later, and you just are like, you thinking back on your whole process, but you're successful. It's like, I still get that same feeling I got when I was 16 doing a clutch on a truck, and it's like, that's never really changed for me. And that's kind of, I guess that's what's always driven my passion. Is like, okay, I can make a career out of this, and I'm good at it, and I still enjoy it to some degree. So it's like, I've always earned that for myself, I guess.
Have you experienced that? I feel like a lot of people in this field have, where you're up against it, like you're talking about, you're getting beat up by a vehicle, and you go away, whether you go home or you take a break, you move on to something else, and this thing's just been kicking your ass for, I don't know, hours a day, whatever. And then you come back to it and you figure out what you were hung up on within minutes, whether it was a timing belt that I tried to line up, 4 or 5 times and it was a tooth off every time. And I'm ready to throw the wrench across the shop. I go do a couple other jobs, come back, first time, boom, it works. And it's like, what is the magic behind that makes that work? Just stepping away from it.
Yeah, I know. I wish I had a current example, but like so many times that's happened where it's like, just walk the power of like walking away and getting your brain off of something where you'll struggle to line something up for so long. And then until you can walk away and decompress, it's like, it just, I don't know, something happens in that time frame and it's like, you just needed a minute away.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, well, it goes to show the power of like your mindset and how much of it is in your head, because your skill set didn't change in that, 24 hours or less that you stepped away from the job. Your hands didn't change. None of that. Your tools didn't change. It's all up here. And it's something I wish I could bottle it, like you say, and figure that out. But, it is, I've experienced that so many times, whether it be diagnostic or mechanical things. And I share that with my students too, because they get frustrated a lot. They're new, they're figuring this stuff out. And depending on the person's demeanor, they can get really frustrated, really upset. And it's just like, hey, dude, you gotta step away. You gotta walk away from this for a little while. You come back and it's going to be so much easier. Trust me, I promise.
Well, yeah. And when I was when I was young and I was an apprentice, like, I was a hothead about a lot of things where I was like, I'm going to do this. And like, I'm determined and I'm cussing and throwing tools and making a scene in the shop. And, like I'd have, older guys mentoring me in that position that are like, hey, walk away for a minute. Like, don't worry about it. And it's like, sometimes I needed that because like, as a young hothead technician, the new guy at the dealership, like you want to impress and you want to be the guy that knows everything, gets everything done faster and that sort of thing. And it's like, sometimes faster is not always better if you're, fighting yourself every step of the way.
Right. So where did you go from tech school?
I went to tech school at a community college kind of in my area, and they had an apprenticeship program at the tech school I went to.
Okay.
So it was there was a few different dealership sponsors for this program. So, and the one I went to was a General Motors program. So I was during school, I was in an apprentice program at a Chevy dealership in my area. And so that's where I kind of started. And then it was a 2-year program, so associate's degree. And I was an apprentice there the entire time I was in school, kind of working under, a master tech there. And then after I graduated school, I pretty much went right on the line, flat rate tech, right out of school.
Mm-hmm. And then worked your way into the European world of things.
Yeah, I mean, it happened a little later on down the road, but I mean, I was successful at the dealership for a little while there, and I guess I kind of I had some personal stuff going on, some addiction stuff I was battling when I was there after school and stuff like that. And, I guess I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because this could be a whole nother conversation, but yeah, long story short, I needed some time off to take care of myself and, kind of get myself out of some trouble.
Okay.
Cause I wasn't, I wasn't showing up the way I could show up, I guess you could say. But, yeah, so that's kind of where the dealership life ended. I was successful there for a couple of years, and I really learned a lot from that whole avenue because I got to work with some great guys, had some great mentors there who kind of really groomed me from, being really green and not knowing anything and being fresh out of school to like, this is the real world. This is how things go. This is the diagnostic process. Like, teaching me the stuff that you don't necessarily learn in a book. And, I feel like that, without that, I probably wouldn't have made it as far as I did. So like, and the dealership world can be kind of harsh at times, especially like, I don't know, thinking about it for me, like being the new guy at the dealership, and it's like you're competing with all these people trying to make hours, and like like I'm sure you know how the flat rate world works. It gets really competitive, and everybody's trying to make more hours and trying to get gravy jobs and that whole sort of thing.
Yep.
But like I did that and I was really successful at that for a while. Like I was always, I was doing well, and there wasn't anything that I wasn't able to take on there. But like I said, I was battling some personal stuff, and I had to take some time off. I wasn't showing up to work on time, and more personal issues got in the way rather than skill set issues. But
okay,
but yeah, I've been clean and sober for 11 years now. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, I needed to take care of myself. But after some time off, that's when I kind of I left the dealership. Wasn't sure if I was going to go back or not. Kind of once I got back on my feet again, and I'd kind of played around with different ideas of like going to a different shop or going to a specialty shop, or kind of like what did I want to go do, because I was. It was kind of like a start over type thing for me. Like, what do I want to do? What do I want to learn? Mm-hmm. And I kind of had an in at this machine shop in the area. And they were just, I was like, cool, this is right up my alley, something new. I can kind of do something different. I'm not, busting my knuckles on the cars themselves all day long. And so it really caught my interest in it because it was like something new to learn. And I don't know. I think back on it now, and I'm like, there was so much information crammed into like a small period of time, because these guys working at this machine shop, they'd all been there for a super long time, and I kind of started out in the disassembly room, just like tearing down engines and looking at stuff, and like cleaning everything and stuff like that. And I think as they kind of learned, I had kind of done this a little bit, or kind of knew a little bit of what I was doing. I kind of got into just doing cylinder heads there.
Okay. So
basically it was just rebuilding cylinder heads, and I don't know, I guess it got old after a while, but it was fun while I was in there, because it's stuff that you don't you don't really do in the field.
Yeah. Right. Just like taking a cylinder head apart and looking at all the components, which sounds simple enough, and you'd figure, okay, well, most technicians or mechanics have done that, but I don't know, if you work in the field long enough, you may not have, right? You may not have disassembled a cylinder head recently, and I think just the act of doing it helps that mindset and that picture in your brain when you're actually working on the car. Like you got that valve that's doing something funny. You can visualize the seat and how everything needs to come together. So I can only imagine. I never did the machine shop thing, but I would think if you did that stuff and you're really, zeroing in on those tolerances and stuff like that, it'd give you a really good perspective going into a mechanical problem.
Well, yeah, and that's it. That's what it did. It really changed my perspective at how I looked at things. For diagnostics as well, because you think about if a valve doesn't seal, or a burnt valve or something like that, you physically see it, and what I don't know. I guess it brings things a little more full circle, because it's like when I was at the dealership and we had a head needed a valve job or whatever, we would send them out, or surfacing heads. It's like you don't put a head on a mill in the dealership or at a local shop. You send it out to the machine shop, and it's like and just to be able to measure that head thicknesses, and that was something that I don't know, I guess it kind of changed my perspective at how I looked at the full circle of what the automotive world is, because there's so many little jobs and little things that go into fixing a car, and there's so many different avenues, and it's somebody's got to do the job, whether one person doesn't know everything and do everything that there is to do.
Yeah, there's a ton of specialization, and it seems like it kind of fallen out of favor there for quite some time, where you saw transmission shops kind of dying off, and not as many machine shops. They're still around because work still needs to be done, but you don't see it as quite as often as you used to. But I think it's kind of I think it's kind of coming back around with all the different areas on the vehicle and all the things that you have to be proficient in if you want to try to tackle the whole vehicle. And I just don't know, as time goes on, I don't know how possible that's going to be. You're going to have different people either within an organization, or you're going to have connections to other shops and other people to help you get all of it done. I mean,
and that was one thing I kind of saw at the machine shop, is like getting that different perspective about the industry too, because, you know, like a machinist, or an automotive machinist, I should say, is like, it's a very specialty thing. And it's like, you know, you're only doing a very small portion of what the big end picture is. And it's like, you know, and I guess I kind of saw the industry change, like while I was there, is like, you know, if somebody can just go buy a new part or go buy a used part that they know is good, why are they going to pay somebody to cut a bunch of valve seats and like machine a cylinder head and like, you know, or like, you know, hone out a block when you could just go buy a crate motor? And it's like just how the prices of things have changed, and it's kind of driven people into why repair when you can replace attitude, you know?
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
And like I've seen that changing in a lot of different other areas as well as automotive, but you know, it's kind of one of those things that it may be a dying industry. Like, who knows? I mean, I still enjoyed it and I enjoyed what I learned from it, but it may be one of those things that's just not needed later on down the road. But it's like you get a valuable understanding of how things work.
Oh yeah. We actually go on a field trip with the students in the fall out to a local machine shop, because that's when we do our engine rebuilding course. So they're in school taking apart cylinder heads, and we disassemble the whole engine and put it back together. And so we bring them out to the machine shop at that point, and the guys, you know, run them through the shop and show them all the lathes work and it's really cool equipment. I mean, if you were to go and buy everything it took to run a machine shop, that's an extremely large amount of money for some of these tools, because they're massive equipment. I mean, 5 times bigger than any like single piece of equipment in an automotive shop, maybe outside of like a hoist or something. But all these different you know, machines that they have for doing different things and getting the metal right. It's pretty cool. You said it kind of got monotonous for you, repetitive eventually. I feel like I'd probably feel the same way, you know, after I did about 100 cylinder heads. Okay, you know, they can't be that different from one to another, but
like once I guess kind of once the honeymoon phase, I guess you could call it, where I'm learning a bunch of new stuff, turned into like monotonous, like how many small block Chevy heads can I put together in a day kind of thing. Yeah, right. Like then, and plus, like, I know the pay. I mean, I guess the pay wasn't, I guess I found I could make better money doing something else. Also, it was another part of it, but you know, it did definitely get old and repetitive, just sitting, you know, hunched over at a workbench doing the same thing every day. Like, it was cool. Like, you know, like you said about all the equipment and stuff, it's pretty cool. They had this machine that for cutting valve seats, it was like this giant, like it was called a SERDI, but this giant machine that you just mount the heads on and you cut the valve. You can put new valve seats in and cut them basically from scratch. Like, you know, like the Chrysler heads that always drop valve seats, you can just like put new ones in and then cut them again. Okay. And it's like, so that was pretty cool, learning how to operate all that stuff. But
sure. Oh
yeah, it definitely it got old, I guess.
Watching the lathe go over the top of cylinder head, it's pretty satisfying.
Watching the metal chips fly.
yeah, exactly. And what was the other one that I thought was cool? Oh, they have the little oven for the pistons, so you heat up, so before you put the wrist pin in there, you heat it up and then you stick the wrist pin in, and that was, I don't know, stuff like that's pretty cool. But yeah, it would only be fun for so long. So
yeah, I mean, the performance side of things was definitely pretty cool too, and that's another avenue that you don't see in a lot of shops, or at least I don't really see now, because I'm not really that interested in performance stuff, I guess, unless it's for my own personal things. But like the performance side of things was kind of interesting to me, like because we had a flow bench, and then
Okay.
we had another guy there where that specialized a little more in port and polishing heads and stuff like that. But I got to sit and watch him do a lot of that stuff, and how scientific you can get with like measuring the flow and like how to cut down drag and resistance inside a cylinder head, like if you're trying to build, a high horsepower race engine, and it's like, just those little bits that you can shave off and what kind of a difference they make. That kind of stuff was pretty cool.
Is there a piece of equipment that actually moves air through the head? I know nothing about that, the performance side of ththings.
I mean, I couldn't really tell you exactly how the bench works, but it's kind of like a big chamber, like it's like a miniature wind tunnel.
Okay.
Kind of thing, and you just mount it to the surface, and it'll flow, and you can kind of direct it through which port you want it to go through, and and then there's a screen that'll just give you the readouts basically of how much it flows, and like what kind of what you're getting out of the other side. Like I guess I'm sure somebody who operates one of those things every day could probably give you a better description of how exactly it operates, but I know
it's cool though.
Yeah, I mean it's cool to see the results of it. I know that the machine shop that I worked at, they did a lot of diesel stuff, so like Cummins drag trucks and stuff like that. Like I forget which one it was. There was one big one in the area that they built that was like some insane amount of horsepower. It was like I don't know, it had like the best time. One of the drag trucks that had like the best time in the country, something like that. And then it came out of that shop. The guy was pretty proud of that, who did all the work on that thing.
Yeah, that's and there's the performance enthusiast side of the industry too, right? I mean, you're talking about all the different areas, and that's a completely different world, right? Mm-hmm. With a whole different draw of people and stuff around it than I guess more of the traditional career centered technician or mechanic, right? Not that you couldn't make a performance job into a career, but just like when you think of just a regular, technician that's working at an independent or a dealer, and then there's a whole separate world just for performance. And I know when I was starting the podcast, for instance, there's like, I don't know, 1,000 performance enthusiast podcasts out there.
Yeah.
And I had never listened to any of them. And I mean, honestly, I don't have much of an interest in that stuff. That's just that's not my angle, but there are so many different things that the right person could get into in this centered around automobiles, whatever your niche is, or whatever your specialty is, or whatever draws you. Like there's so many different choices for you to go for.
Mm-hmm. And I never really got into the whole performance thing too. Like it's interesting to me, and I can sit and BS with somebody about like, how cool something is. Like I still find it very fascinating, but as far as understanding it all and like, really making that my career choice, like the performance side of things isn't really what I'm drawn to either. It's like there's plenty of OEM stuff that I've still yet to understand that I want to keep doing that. That's made a pretty good career for me this far. So I'm just going to keep on that.
Sure. Well, where'd you go from the machine shop?
So, after I left the machine shop, I kind of got an in at a transmission shop, and, I'd done a lot of transmission work before when I was at the Chevy dealership. So I got pretty comfortable, like rebuilding like 4L60Es and 4T65s and like just the normal stuff you saw in like the early 2000s Chevys and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I got pretty comfortable doing those. So I was like, okay, cool. This is right up my alley. I can go. They wanted me there, and they offered me a good wage to do it. So that worked out pretty good for a little while. And I did a lot of R&Rs. I rebuilt a lot of the GM stuff. I would do some of the teardowns and rebuilds on those, but as far as some of the other stuff, I didn't really know as well. I could probably fudge my way through it if I had a book, but I kind of stuck with the stuff that I was a little more efficient at. But
okay,
at this point, I was like, I could pretty much do any R&R like in a couple of hours. So it was like, they kind of took advantage of that, I guess, as far as like I'm the fastest guy on the floor that can yank a transmission out and put one back in. So I did a lot of that there. And like as you can imagine, that also gets old. So
Yep.
but I mean, like, I learned a lot about different, like, I don't know, the ins and outs of what it's like to be in a transmission shop, because it's totally a different thing when all you focus on is transmissions.
Yeah, it is. It is a very. I service a lot of transmission shops, and some of them do full service too, and then it's kind of a mix. But the ones that are like strictly transmission shops, it's a very different vibe. From what I've noticed, and it's not 100% across the board, but from what I've noticed, much cleaner than your typical repair shop. I don't know. You can tell me if you think that's true or not, but
I mean, this one I was at, I don't know, you might see that one and disagree, but I mean, as far as the build room was really, really clean. So it was always nice to work in the build room. Like they had one guy that all he did there was building transmissions, and he was kind of like, he was a really smart guy. He's really quiet. He kept to himself. He was really good at what he did. But he just stayed in the build room, and you just hand him a unit, and he'd go to town on it, and he'd get back a shiny one and put it back in the car. But like, we had a few guys that could, like if we had a lot of them to be done, like I was comfortable doing like some of the GM stuff. So I was like, I knew I could do that stuff without having too many problems. So I would go in there and do some of those every once in a while. But like anything else, like, I mean, I guess this is kind of going off the same thing as the machine shop. It's like you do the same thing over and over and over again. It's like you get like, yeah, you may be good at it, but it gets old. And it's like, I'm the kind of person where, if I do the same thing every day, it's like eventually I don't really want to do it anymore. Or I want to learn something new or move into it, like a different avenue, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. That's exactly how I am. And I don't know, sometimes I think it's like, it's a problem, right? Like you should, once you find something good, you should stick with it. And at least my parents' generation, it was more of you get into a job or at least a career field and you stick there, for the entire 40 years that you're employed. And people would. I knew a guy at Firestone that stayed there for 40 years at the same, working for the same place, more or less, doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm like, oh, I don't think I could do that. Like, I need things a little different. I need to mix it up here and there to even want to get up out of bed and go to work in the morning,
And like, I would never go back and say like I regret taking any of these jobs, because like I learned so much, and I still look back on it and see it as like a valuable time to where I spent my energy. But like, I guess I just knew when to say enough's enough and I'm going to move on, like respectfully, I guess. Because like I don't know if I would be where I'm at if I didn't take those steps or didn't, go through those learning processes, because like I never went into any one of these jobs thinking like I want to work here for the rest of my life. And like, I just want to do this one thing. Like if I wanted to do that, I'd go work on an assembly line and build one part over and over and over again. And that's just not me. I just can't do that.
Yeah. I don't know. It might be more of like a generational thing, because I know some other people that aren't in the automotive field, and they kind of have the same mindset of, you'd almost call it job hopping, but they get to the point where it's just like, I don't want to do this anymore. It may not even be the place. It's not my coworkers. It's just, I don't want to do this thing anymore. I want to move on to something else. I want to learn something new. I want to move up. And I'm sure it's tough to be an employer these days, because so many people probably thinking the same thing. And how do you retain somebody for a long period of time? It's gotta be a challenge nowadays to do so,
Well, yeah. And it's like, once you reach that personal that personal ceiling or whatever it may be at wherever you're at, and you feel like you've absorbed as much as you can absorb, or you've reached that like peak level of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
You can only ride that out for so long before it's like, okay, what's next? And I guess that's where I've always, the point I've always gotten to, and who knows, maybe where I'm at now might be the same story, and I may like reach another point where, I have to move on. But I guess I don't get tired of pushing myself.
Yeah, that's the thing, is why not strive to improve yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're doing the exact same thing 10 years from now, right? We're doing the exact same thing. And especially if you're doing it at the same level after 10 years, I'd be concerned about that if that was me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I haven't improved at all in a decade.
Mm-hmm.
What is the issue? Why not? I would expect, if I could see into the future and see 46-year-old Sean, like, I hope that I've improved
Mm-hmm.
by some metric at what I'm doing. And if you're not pushing yourself, you're not striving for that new thing. I don't know how you would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, you reach a limit. You do reach a limit in certain positions, and maybe that's part of what the automotive field is lacking. Is for a technician,
Mm-hmm.
there are only so many levels and positions that you can hit, and then at some point, at least for me, it was, okay, well, you're at the top. Now it's just how many hours can you turn? That's the only improvement marker that you can make.
Yeah.
Is more productivity. And again, there's a cap there.
And like I've been at that point too, where it's like, I push myself so hard during the week, is like, okay, how many hours can I get? And like, how efficient can I be at doing this one job? And like, you get burnt out, you burn yourself out doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, one thing about the automotive industry is like, it always changes and it always grows just as much as we're willing to do. So it's like, no matter how much I'm willing to learn about what cars are on the road right now, in a year from now or in a couple of years from now, there's going to be a whole lot of different ones with more stuff to learn.
Yep.
So
that's what's kept me in it for as long as it has, is the fact that there's always something new. There's always a new challenge right around the corner. And I don't know what it's going to be, but it actually, it keeps me excited. It keeps me coming back every day. So that, I guess, it can be a frustrating part at times, but I actually enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I've known those guys who's like, they've been in a career, their career lube tech, or that it's like, that's just what they enjoy, or they, people are like, they get real comfortable at doing brakes and doing, suspension stuff, like, simple stuff, or stuff that I would call simple, I guess, to me. But, they enjoy it. And it's like, nothing against those guys that do that. And then you could still make a healthy career out of it.
Yes.
But like, it's just not for me. Like, I guess it's like, my mentality is like, I'd drive myself crazy doing that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, there are some people who just want that 9 to 5. I'll come in, I'll do the same thing I did yesterday, and I'll get my paycheck. And then maybe they have something outside of, their career or the shop or whatever. And then that's their focus. And so I'm just here to make money so that I can fund the other things I do with my family or my own hobbies or whatever. So there's that side of it too. But, and obviously this podcast and Facebook groups draws in the people who are career focused, right? That are passionate about what we do on the job. And so that's probably part of it too, is that we are really interested in what we're doing, and we want to be engaged with what we're doing. And so we're seeking out that next challenge or the way that we can improve ourselves to get better. And yeah, sometimes that involves moving on and trying something different.
Yeah. And, I guess it always keeps me interested. I know when I go home and think about the car that I'm working on that day at work, it's like, it may be a 9 to 5 job, but my brain is there a lot more than that, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. It's like, going home, like my wife will give me a hard time when I'm like, looking on we're having a conversation and I'm like thinking about something, like I had to look this up on my phone real quick. And like, I was just thinking about this car at work and I thought about this one thing and I just had to look it up real quick. And otherwise I'd forget it, and it's like, stuff just creeps into my brain and I can't help it.
Yeah. Or you start talking cars and stuff like that. And they're just like, I don't understand what you're saying. You can tell me all about it, but I don't get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's just, that's who we are as individuals. This is what draws us in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how'd you make your way to the Sprinter shop?
Okay. So let's see, I guess, when I left the transmission shop, I went to work for this guy that I kind of met through a friend of a friend. He owned a shop, and it was like a European shop. Well, it's a German car shop, but I mean, they do a lot of other European stuff there too. And he's the guy who runs that shop also owns the Sprinter shop that I'm working at. We just kind of split off to do this Sprinter thing a little over a year ago. But yeah, same business. We just have two separate shops. And so I got in with him because I was kind of tired of doing the transmission thing, and he offered me a good wage, and I really liked the individual that runs this shop. He's just a really good guy. I like the atmosphere he had going on in there, and plus, like, I guess I always had a thing for Volkswagens. Even when I was back when I was young, I always owned these like beater Volkswagens, and I don't know. I guess I just enjoyed. They were always weird to me, but that's what I liked about them. Is like I always had to figure things out on my own, and it was nothing like anything else. So, so I was like, okay, sweet. This is right up my alley, and all the stuff that I didn't already know. I guess because I didn't really know like BMW or Mercedes all that well, so that was kind of like a new thing for me to learn there. And he had this guy working there also who was kind of like, he had been a master tech at a Volkswagen dealer for a long time, like really, really respectable guy that like I felt like I could learn a lot from. And I guess I just liked how this guy ran his shop. It's kind of like a smaller independent shop, had 3 bays, and it was him. He kind of did all and he's the owner and also worked in the shop, so he kind of like had his hands on and everything. But I really liked the team atmosphere that they had going on in there, because it's kind of like, I guess it was kind of like a relief from the flat rate system that most other shops kind of have going on. Where it was like that wasn't how he operated things. It was kind of like everybody kind of worked towards the greater goal of like getting cars fixed, and that was what was cool about it. Was like, yeah, we all kind of had our own jobs and we would all look at our own cars, but when it came down to like, okay, I'm gonna like, let's all stop and put our heads together on this one thing, or like I'm struggling to figure out this like wiring issue on this like old Mercedes or whatever. Like, I know you're really good at those, like, or we all just kind of worked together, and that's what was cool about it for me.
Yeah, that's the flat rate mindset definitely pushes everybody to their own corner and focuses on their own paycheck. And so unless you get that, that right group of people, or just the right person, people don't want to help each other or spend exorbitant amounts of time helping other people. It's not beneficial. You're losing money essentially if you're taking time out of your day to help somebody. So that is cool. I never did work on a team pay structure. I've heard about them and had it explained to me a few times, but it sounded like an interesting way to do things, as long as you're on the right team. I could imagine it going south if you had some team members that were not pulling their weight. You know what I mean?
And that, like, I guess that was what was kind of cool about this shop and what kind of really drew me in. And I guess it's one of the things I really kind of value about it still is, I mean, I'm still employed by the same guy, I guess you could say. But it's like the whole family atmosphere of how we operate things, and we all respect each other and we all treat each other respectfully. And like, that as much as I want to say that's how every shop is, it's not. And there are some shops where, you know, it's every man for himself. And, you know, if you don't know it, like,
good luck.
Sorry, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't like to operate that way. And it was just like it was a breath of fresh air to be able to work in a shop like this, where it's like, if one of us knows, we all know kind of way of operating. And like, you know, we're all willing to help each other. And it was cool because like everybody kind of specializes in different sort of things. Like we had, like, I guess I'm not at that specific shop that I started at anymore, but like he has some apprentices, and he has this one guy who's the master tech. And like, I'll still to this day, like, go pick that guy's brain about random stuff because he's just a wealth of knowledge. But, you know, and he's just got like a couple people who can do different things. But I kind of walked into that shop to be like, I guess I wasn't, not as an apprentice, but like kind of like, okay, this is what are you good at? What do you want to do? Like, what do you, and it was kind of nice to just get that, like, you know, you can come in here and do what you're good at, and we want to like help you do that. You know, we all work together. And so, like, I guess it was just kind of like a free avenue. Is like, okay, yeah, you want to work on this car, you want to work on this, you get stuck, like, you know, we'll all figure it out together. Like, yeah. I don't know. And it was cool. And I don't know that he really knew anything about me at the time when I started, as far as like what my experience level was. Like, he knew I could bust out work, and I could, you know, I had my own tools. I had a full toolbox, and I'd been a tech for a long time. So like, he knew that about me. But like, it was I don't know. I guess it was just like it was a well-oiled machine, the way things worked there. We just kind of like, cool.
It's really cool when you get that group of guys and girls that work really well together. I know there was a period of time when I was at Firestone, and there were some times at Firestone where it was the hard opposite, but there was a period of time where we had the group. We had the right mix of people in the store, up front and in back, store manager, all of it. And man, we, like you say, well-oiled machine. We just everybody jived together. There wasn't people fighting over work. We would help each other. And we were all making money. And unfortunately, that doesn't last too long, at least not at Firestone, because people leave, or they move people around to different stores. And we would talk to each other after that. We'd be like, you remember those good old days, you know, when we had that group together there? And it was fun to work with that group of people, because everybody kind of made each other better. But like you say, helping out and offering advice, and hey, I'm better at electrical, you're better at alignments. Maybe we should, you know, swap jobs here, and the whole shop gets better because of it. It'd definitely be a good thing if there's more of that out there. You can't do it on your own, and Flat Rate really, I think, leans on you to do it that way. Like, you just need to know it all, and if you don't, well, you're just not going to make that much money. But everybody's got their specialty and that thing that they're the best at or really good at, and why not utilize a group of people to make it better for everyone? I don't know.
And I guess it really helped me kind of push myself too, which was like, I felt was a really good thing for me, was because it pushed me to learn things that I had never really pushed myself to. Because like, I knew I had, like, if I say I don't know, or like I need help, like, I got people willing to help me. And that's always cool, because you don't necessarily get that everywhere, where it's like, if you can't figure it out or you get stuck, you're just stuck until you figure it out, you know, unless you have people that are willing to say, hey, did you think about this? Or did you, like, let me look at this wiring diagram and let me tell you, let me give you some of my 2 cents. Or, you know, like, it just having a bunch of other people to kind of have their hands in it. Yeah. It kind of helps you figure out what you're missing sometimes.
Yeah. I'm in some chat groups right now, where it's absolutely amazing the things that get done because of the combination of knowledge
Mhm.
that's shared in there. It's crazy what you can get done with a group of people as opposed to just by yourself trying to figure stuff out. It's nuts.
Yeah. And like, it really pushed me to just be like, yeah, I'm, like, because whereas before, if there was something that I wasn't so knowledgeable about, I would say, I don't know. I don't really want to dig into that because so and so might figure it out in 5 minutes, But where I'd be like, okay, yeah, give me a shot at it, and it would like, like, yeah, some crazy electrical problem, like, yeah, give me a try at it, and I know if I get stuck, I can, I can have somebody kind of push me in the right direction if I'm not going there already, or that sort of thing. Because like when you're looking at, especially with European stuff, when you're dealing with, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Volkswagen, like that's that's a lot to cover if you don't already know like a little bit about that sort of thing. Like I said, I knew Volkswagens a little bit, and I knew, like, before that, like my last time actually working on, like, wrenching on cars at, like, as a technician, it was, at the dealership where it's like, a do anything type of technician. So this was kind of like, I'd been a couple of years removed from actually working on the cars themselves, aside from like transmission and machine work. So it was kind of like getting my feet wet again, back into taking on every sort of problem. Like, yeah, I can bust out work, but as far as like getting back in, because like cars change, like diagnosis stuff is always a challenge, no matter how you slice it. It's right. Like you never just know the answer. You can never retain all the information. It's like, yeah, all these cars fail this one way. It's never like that, as much as I wish it would be.
Yeah. And it almost is just a completely different mindset going into the European stuff. I find that a lot of the time where I have to step away from my GM, Ford, Chrysler background, because that's what I did 90% of when I was a technician learning this stuff. And when it's like learning to speak a language, right? And you figure it out and English just makes sense. And then you hear somebody talking German or Japanese and it doesn't make sense at all. Not that there isn't a structure to it. There definitely is. And it does make sense to that other person speaking German, but you've got to, I don't know, you got to get out the dictionary and figure out what all these acronyms and parts mean and how these diagrams work and why is the service info so vague and tough to find things.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, that's just it too, is like, the whole diagnostic process when it comes to different, like you can spend all the time in the world just trying to learn the processes of one make and still not know all of it. So it's like, it can be a lot to take in sometimes. And like, having specialty tools, and especially when it comes to, European stuff, there's a lot of specialty tools.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's a lot of things you have to pay attention to in service information and like service bulletins and things like that too, where there's really critical changes and updates and like mid split year levels. And there's a lot of stuff that you've got to be in tune with if you're going to successfully navigate even just repair, not even just the diagnosis part of it, but the repair side of things. There's quite a bit of knowledge there, but again, it's an area where, somebody can be very successful. And I am learning as I go here, the European side of things, as difficult as it may be at times. It sure pays well when you can do it. I've been doing a few more European programming events recently, and you end up making more cash for it. The customers they're either willing to pay or just used to paying more, or they don't they don't have the money to fix it in the first place. So,
Well, then like there's a lot of shops or just like general shops that are like, yeah, we don't know these. We don't have a guy that knows these things. So we're not, just so we're going to send it on down the road,
exactly.
So if you're the guy that wants to take it on, then, that's just better, busier for you,
Uh-huh.
It's like this, as far as service information goes, like, unless you're at the dealership, like if you're an independent European shop, if you don't have somebody there that has somewhat of a base level of knowledge about, certain things, it's just a challenge, because whether you have, pro demand, all data, Identifix, like it doesn't really matter. You're not gonna get all of it. It's just, that's just the way it is with European stuff. It's funny, because I'll work on other, like, we get some Fords and Chryslers and stuff like that in at the Sprinter shop now, just from customers we have, and I'll like look up a wiring schematic or look up a description operation of something, and I'm like, wow, it's so descriptive. Like, I forgot that you can get this much information, because I'm used to working on Sprinters. It's like I have to fudge my way through stuff, or like I have to sit there and pick away and try and fill in the gaps a lot of the time, and I'm used to that now.
Right. Well, that's all it is. It's what are you used to? What is your familiar base that you do every day, and then that becomes the normal. So then, something's either way easier or far more difficult. And so I was the GM Ford Chrysler guy, so European stuff seems really difficult. It's not that it can't be done, it's just you gotta approach it differently. So you were at the European shop, and then is this the place where the Sprinter vans are, or is that a different shop?
So how it kind of all worked out was we would take in a few Sprinters at this shop, but the shop was so small that it's like every time we'd get a Sprinter van in, it would kind of just gum up the works, and it was like we had there wasn't a whole lot of parking, but we just kept getting people coming in, because so many shops are like, they're not interested in working on Sprinters just because they're odd and they're strange and they're hard to park anywhere and hard to get parts for, whatever it may be. Like, we just kept getting asked to do them, and we just didn't have the space for it. So the guy we kept throwing around the idea of, like, he's like, we should start up a spot and just do Sprinters, like, because there's plenty of them out there. And I don't know if it's like this out by you, but like the Sprinters have just completely taken over the West Coast right now. As far as like people camper van conversions.
There's not much of that around here, but I've definitely seen what you're talking about, where they do the whole conversion.
And I don't know, because like I've been to other places, like, and not seen them as heavily as I see them here. But like the whole van life thing is like a real thing, like Washington, Oregon, California, like people have, and like people are selling their houses and buying a, $150,000 Sprinter van and building it. That's their home on wheels, Okay. So there's a lot of them.
Yeah. See, you can't do that here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
That doesn't work with 40 below weather too well.
Yeah. But yeah, so we just saw this whole thing as like a really lucrative business. So we opened the doors on this shop about, I want to say it was January 2020. So it was kind of a slow start, but once we kind of got a solid customer base, like they're just flowing in. Like, now we've got more work than we know what to do with, because we kind of started out on a small scale because didn't really know what to expect. So I was doing a lot of the Sprinters at the other shop. Whenever they would come in, I was kind of like the guinea pig of like, okay, you're going to be the Sprinter guy. So that's how I guess I kind of got thrown into this gig unwillingly, I guess you could say, but I'm always up for a challenge.
Yeah.
But so when we opened this thing, he's like, okay, you're going to be the guy. So it's kind of like we're still kind of like on a small scale as far as how the shop operates, because there's me who's like, I do everything. Like I kind of have my hands on every van that comes in, or every vehicle that comes in. And then I have there's an apprentice, or there's two apprentices that work there. And then there's one kind of a floater guy that works at the other shop. Cause we're like our shop and the car shop we're about a mile apart. So we have one guy who's kind of like a floater tech. Like if we have a bunch of extra, like if we got a bunch of brake jobs to bang out, or like, simple stuff where you can just come in and bust these out, he'll come and do that sort of thing. But
sure.
As far as like all the diagnostic stuff, like I'm basically the shop foreman, for lack of a better term. I just kind of like have my hands on everything.
Okay. That's cool. What are you using for scan tool interfaces for those things?
We've been having pretty good luck with the Autel. We've got an Autel Elite that basically does everything. I mean, we don't really mess with programming too much. That's something I personally have wanted to get into. The guy who runs the shop is like, he's not really interested in programming stuff, so we haven't really jumped into that. I may at some point on my own accord, but
sure.
But yeah, we use the Autel for they work pretty well. It works pretty well with the Sprinter, as far as I know. We also have the Zentry. We have a Zentry program on laptop that will do a lot of all the stuff that the Autel hasn't been able to do. So I think we got most of that covered.
Okay. Yeah, I would imagine that'd probably cover a lot of stuff. I was going to ask too about, I've gotten a few calls on the where the DEF fluid runs out and they get to they drive it until it won't start anymore. Do you guys see that at all? Do you do those resets?
Yeah. So that's a whole new gig. Cause like, I don't know, a lot of shops are just like, we don't know what to do. It's a very confusing and complicated system when it comes to these sprinters and what's required for them to operate, because it'll lock you out basically, whether you run out of DEF fluid or a part of the SCR system, or the whole emissions system is broken. If something's broken, it starts this countdown and locks you out, and it'll set this code. It basically sets a hard fault in the ECU and says, okay, we're no longer allowing this engine to start, allowing it to operate. And there's an SCR module that controls the whole emission system, DEF fluid, like exhaust after treatment system. And that's what sets the code in it. It basically turns the code over to the ECU, and you can't just go in with a normal scanner and clear that fault. It just won't let you do it.
Right.
So the Zentry program is the only thing that we found that'll do it for. I mean, I guess that's the only thing I've found that'll do it. The Autel, it has the functions to be able to do it, but I've been unsuccessful with it. And that's why we bought the Zentry program, because you can go in there and you have to clear those faults, and then it basically resets. Once you can clear those faults out, it'll reset the module and start the counter over again. But if like, say you have a bad NOx sensor, like NOx sensor on the, if there's one of those and it's intermittent or whatever, you can go and clear out all these faults, and then send them on down the road and say, okay, now you're back. You can drive it again, and then the fault comes back. It'll just start their countdown all over again, and then you'll see them again in a couple months, and the problem's not fixed. So it can get kind of convoluted, especially when we see these vans and people are like, yeah, it says I have 0 starts and I can't drive it anywhere. I'm towing it to you. And the thing's got a novel of fault codes in it, and you're trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. I haven't done one myself, but I had a few calls on them. I actually had it's not a Sprinter, but it was a Mercedes. It's a 2019 A220, I think was the model. It's a sedan. It had been crashed and it was at this shop. They were going to do some body work to it, actually it was a repair shop. So they might've been doing, I don't know, AC condenser and radiator stuff. I'm not even really sure they were going to do some repair work on it, but the bags had gone off, pretensioners had deployed, right? But this thing wouldn't crank. So you turn the key, or it was push button, you press the key, step on the brake, and nothing. And there wasn't really any like indication on the dash as to why it wouldn't crank. And I went in with a scan tool, and I'm still learning Euro as I go. I talked to a few other people, and they knew exactly what was going on as soon as I told them. But I go in, and there's no codes in the engine control module. I thought was okay. That's strange. It won't crank, and the ECM's in charge of running the starter relay on this thing. And I go through the rest of the codes, and there's codes in the airbag module, but it's all just open loop stuff. So yeah, it deployed the pretensioners. It set off the bag. You can see they cut the bag away from the steering wheel, but there are no codes like indicating that it has disabled this thing from cranking. Well, like I said, after talking to some people, there's a message that goes from the SRS module to the engine control to say, hey, the bags have gone off. This thing does not crank anymore. It just will not happen. But you can go in with the scan tool and reset this in the powertrain, in the engine control module, and then it'll crank and start. And you don't have to replace the SRS module at that point, right? If you want the airbag light off, you got to do that. But that's just for the powertrain. You actually have to go in and complete this. And so surprisingly enough, I got the Top Don was the tool that did it for me, that actually did this reset. I had a couple other tools that had it in there. Like you say, like the Autel says it has the function, you press it and it fails. The Top Don actually did it. I was like, that's awesome. And
yeah. And sometimes you never know what to expect with that sort of thing, because like there's so many different options there, or there'll be options there that you don't even know what they're supposed to be. And especially when it comes to Euro stuff, because there's the whole language barrier. Well, too, where it's like, these instructions were written out in German and then converted over to English. And then now you're reading it as if they had wrote it in German. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
And then they took it into Chinese when they made the launch of the Autel. So there's all kinds of translations.
Yeah. And you're getting it third hand and trying to make sure you're hitting the right buttons.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, we've run into so many like weird problems, especially we get these Sprinter vans where they're, people buy them and they want to convert them into camper vans or whatever. And they'll be like, it's an old FedEx van or something. And it'll have, I don't know, there's just a lot of things that we've seen some with like 600,000 miles on them before.
Wow.
Come in, like, and it's crazy. I've never seen so many vehicles with that high of mileage before in my life before I started working on these Sprinter vans, where I'd say the average mileage, if you would average all the vans we work on, is probably around 300K. Wow, and it's like, you don't see that in any other model of vehicle. It's like,
yeah, not on a regular basis.
Yeah. But like you can imagine with working on stuff that's been around that long or seeing that much road time, like you see some pretty wild problems or some pretty like neglected vehicles, I guess you could say too.
Yeah, well, neglected for sure, but yeah, some probably unique issues, stuff that is not going to pop up on like the Identifix top hits, because after that much time on the road, you're going to have, so especially on a diesel, you're going to have all kinds of vibrations and wear to harnesses and things like that, and there's components that'll fail that they did their job. They lasted 300,000 miles and it's just time, but no one else has seen that particular failure before. Very few people have seen that before. That's interesting.
When it comes to the emissions systems, as far as what's required on one of these diesel engines too, it only complicates.
In California, so
yeah. Well, then, it only complicates things more because, like I said, a diesel engine was designed to be like a piece of equipment. It's not designed to be a daily driver automobile as far as what diesels were invented to be. So you add these emission systems to make them compliant, and it complicates how they operate. So, you have like the diesel particulate filter, and then those plug up and then cause all sorts of problems. So it's like you get them in with, like, say something comes in and has a plugged DPF. I mean, you can't just if you just throw a DPF in it, it might plug up again, because you have to figure out why that DPF plugged up in the first place, because they're supposed to regenerate. The way the system's designed is it has an after treatment system where it's supposed to it basically overfuels it to heat up everything and cook everything out of that particulate filter. And if for some reason, like you could say you just have a bad mass airflow sensor and you drive it around, say you've been driving it around with the check engine light on for a year, the system won't ever regenerate itself because the computer says, hey, we have a problem. We're not going to allow this engine to regenerate anymore. So now your diesel particulate filter's plugged. So it's like when you see it has a plugged DPF, and that's obvious, but it's like, what caused that to happen in the first place? So it's like sometimes you have to look at the way these systems operate as a whole and say, okay, what really caused this problem? Because you could be looking at the problem a few steps down the line before you're even seeing it.
Yeah. Well, and I can't imagine those components are cheap to replace. So then you put one in and then it plugs up again. And yeah.
I think a diesel particulate filter for a Sprinter right now, I want to say is like a couple grand.
Damn.
They're not cheap.
What are the regulations there as far as emissions goes? Is that something where if you have a check engine light on, you're not getting registration, or how does that work for diesels in California?
I'm actually in Washington, but
okay.
Yeah, in California, I imagine it's probably stricter, but here in Washington, they just did away with the requiring. They used to say, the law used to be that if you had a check engine light on, they wouldn't allow you to register your vehicle unless you got a waiver. And the waiver used to be like if you could go into a shop and get a quote and it was more than X amount of dollars. I can't remember the amount on it, but if the quote for whatever it was to repair the check engine light was over X amount of dollars, they would waive it and you could register it anyways.
Interesting.
But, yeah, it's kind of odd, but
yeah.
But I think now as far as I know, they did away with all of that. So now it's just kind of open. I mean, because they kind of they put it more on the manufacturer's plate of like, they expect these vehicles to be designed to operate clean, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So it's kind of they took it away from the responsibility of the consumer and put it on to be the responsibility of the manufacturer to make these engines operate. And that's I think where these diesel engines came up with the whole lockout thing, where it's like, okay, if you're not going to fix your DEF system, we're just going to lock you out so you can't drive your van.
Oh man. Well, Mercedes is the only one I'm aware of that does that. I don't spend a lot of time in the diesel world, but does anybody try tuning the Sprinters? Is that even a thing? Because I get that a lot with the Fords and the Dodge Cummins all the time.
I haven't seen, or I guess I haven't heard of anybody wanting to tune one for performance reasons. Because I mean, I don't know. I don't think it would be that fun to have a, rolling coal down the road in your Sprinter van. But
right,
I don't know. I'm sure maybe somebody will do it.
I'm sure somebody is.
We do get a lot of people asking about the emissions deletes and stuff like that, because it causes so many problems, and people just like throw their hands up in the air, especially dealing with, you're dealing with the Mercedes dealership that they don't want to answer questions. They just say, we're going to, it's cost this much. We're going to fix it here and you'll have it back. And then they just keep having to bring it back, and they say it's more emission stuff, or you didn't fill your AdBlue, or, people get tired of that sort of stuff. So they're like, okay, can I just delete the whole system? We get asked that question all the time. Because it's like, if you know anything about diesels, if you just straight pipe the thing and you delete the EGR and delete the EGR cooler, the engine will run better and cleaner, and you'll get more fuel efficiency and more performance. And that's just the way it goes. Yeah. But as far as it being legal, it's a gray area,
Yeah, well, that was Volkswagen's thing for a while.
Yeah, with the whole
way better fuel mileage.
Yeah, the whole Dieselgate thing. That was a pretty interesting thing. I was working at the other European shop at the time, and it was kind of funny because when they started doing that, because we worked on a lot of TDIs there when those the 2-liter common rail TDIs came out, and those things, man, those things those are quick cars. You get one with a six speed manual in them. They're super fun to drive.
Yeah, my buddy had one.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like once they did the whole recall where it's like you'd have to take it back in. They would either buy it back from you or you'd take it into the dealership and they'd reflash the ECU so it's actually clean.
Yeah, and then I don't know what the percentage was, but it dropped your fuel mileage.
Oh yeah, and they didn't drive the same either. They weren't the same. They weren't as fun to drive.
Yeah. Yeah, that was crazy. And it was some college students, if I remember correctly, that discovered it. They were running the tests on the vehicle going down the road, and it was going some insane amount over what the regulation was, but it would pass when it was on a dyno. Because they programmed it in to recognize when the car was on a dyno, and then all of a sudden it did its thing to run in that emissions friendly state. But when it's out on the road, they're pumping out all kinds of NOx gas out of there. So they're running super lean. But
yeah, I mean it's pretty genius if you think about it. I mean, aside from it being a super unethical and against the law. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty like genius plan.
Well, and it makes you wonder who else is doing what back then or even right now. Because if one company was doing it, multiple companies were doing it, and they were just the ones that got caught. And so everybody else is like, oh, okay, quick, we got to send out an update for all these cars.
Well, and that's the thing too, especially when it comes to, because diesels have been, I guess, as far as the European diesel stuff, that stuff's been in Europe, and it's a lot more prevalent in Europe than it has been in America. Like for years and years before, to whereas like they didn't require their emissions laws weren't nearly as strict as what they are in America. So you try and introduce these cars that were designed around Europe, Europe's standards and Europe's stuff, and they want to introduce them to a U.S. market. So you have to add all these things, and it makes them, it complicates the system, I guess. And engines weren't designed around these emission systems. These emission systems were an afterthought. So think about all the problems those add, and it gets complicated.
Well, cool, man. Do you got anything else that you wanted to add or anything before we wrap this up?
No, nothing I could think of. I mean,
cool.
I feel like this went pretty good.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed just BSing with you, and this is why I love doing the podcast. Just getting to talk to people like you. It's fun. So.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't talk about anything too specific, but yeah, it's nice to. And this is what I feel like I've always gotten out of even listening to the other podcasts, is just like being able to relate and being able to talk about the things we do, because it's not something that everybody necessarily feels as passionate about as a select number of individuals. So it's nice to be able to connect with that community more and just talk about stuff.
Yeah, right. You go to a dinner party with your wife or something, and maybe you get lucky and there's somebody else there can kind of relate careers and passions and stuff like that. But that doesn't happen too often for me in my day-to-day life. But to getting to talk to people through the podcast and stuff, it's been really cool. So thank you for spending your time with me. Thanks for reaching out to me too.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad I reached out.
Yeah. Okay, that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to give another thank you to Wesley for spending his time with me this evening, sit down on the show. I enjoyed that talk. Hopefully you did as well. Just a reminder, on June 3rd and June 4th, I'm going to be hosting Mike Christofferson's EPROM and programming class here in Twin Cities, Minnesota. If you're interested in joining that class, we still have a few spots open. So reach out to me through my email or through Facebook. The email will be in the show notes of this episode, and let me know. We can still get you on board for that class. But other than that, let's all get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.